Okie dokie. Chapter 2, Esther. And of course, you would wonder what was up if we didn't start with a timeline, or at least have one timeline, right? And I am hot. I'm going to start pulling sleeves up and probably end up taking a sweater off. Whew. But as chapter 2 starts with after these things. Now, you haven't heard me teach a whole lot, but I know you've heard me in the past couple of weeks say this more than once. Read slowly and ask questions. So if I'm reading slowly after these things, then I ask questions. What is the obvious question to ask? What things? So what things? Well, remember how I told you? Well, we had the story we just finished of Vashti being deposed. So when we read these stories quickly, when the story is told quickly, I kind of had to smile like in Sunday school this morning, and Tim Crane is talking about Esther, and it's a minute and a half Esther story that we were talking about. You know, I mean, I'm not criticizing that. He was giving us this overview to get to chapter 4 that we were talking today in Sunday school. So I kind of had to chuckle because I thought that's what I said. Yeah, we just kind of run through this, not realizing that this story of Esther takes place over a 10-year period of time. So when we are after these things, is this like the next day? We had the feast last night. Vashti refused to come. All of these decrees were sent out to 127 provinces, and the next day. Now I doubt that, right? Because just the logistics of trying to get this edict out to 127 provinces probably took a while. Well, we actually have a little bit more time that has transpired too, because we know that Ahasuerus, based on history, was very intent on conquering where? What country did he? Greece. Greece was going to complete what he wanted at the moment. Now, he actually wanted to go on into Europe, because in his mind, and in his father's mind, prior to him, if you could get Greece and Europe, you had conquered the world. You were the ruler of the world. So he had his sights set on what his daddy had his sights set on. Now his dad had tried to conquer Greece, and actually somewhere in his travels, he had actually been killed. And this is why Ahasuerus was now king. And so Ahasuerus wanted to avenge his father's death, so he hated the Greeks even more. But he was going to go after them. And so he did. And remember I told you about his massive army and navy last week? 2 million men and 4,000 ships. Should have been absolutely no match. But he was sorely defeated in at least 2 huge battles. One wiped out his navy, one wiped out the majority of his army. But he ended back up in Shushan, very defeated and depressed and down, because the trophy he had gone for, he had not come home with. After these things. Those are the things that phrase that begins chapter 2 would be referring to. So let's look on our timeline. So we're talking about now, it's 481 to 480 in the palace. Esther at this point in time, living in Shushan area, would be 12 or 13 years old, right? Based on our timeline. Now, if you did your homework and you paid attention, Elizabeth George, and a lot of the other things that maybe perhaps you could pull up to read, will tell you about how many years. And you go on the timeline too. If in the book, they're looking at this from, I don't have it on the timeline. Oh yeah, I do. The book of Esther begins. Elizabeth George tells us approximately 4 years has transpired now from the time that Vashti was deposed. He had gone to try to conquer Greece, and then now he's back in the palace after these things. But I have a little problem with the 4-year thing. And let me tell you why I have the problem with that. We're going to let Scripture tell us why we have a problem with that. Can you look at verse 12? Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, and blah, blah, blah. So that verse tells me that when these women were collected to the palace, how long did they have to stay in the palace before they were even allowed to go to the king? A year. And so we know if Esther was made queen in 479, she had to live there for at least a year prior based on verse 12. Am I making sense? Okay, so if that's the case, we don't know exactly when she got to the palace, because if all of these girls were collected to this harem, and they were all required to be there for 12 months prior to them going one by one into the king. So my 12 months is over today, but I might be number 372 on the list, which means I'm there for another 1 year before I even get called. Right? So we don't really know exactly when she arrived there, but best guess 480, 481, something like that. So if that being said, maybe 2 years has now transpired between Vashti losing her queenship, he's going over to try to conquer Greece, he comes back defeated, and on with the story in chapter 2. So that's that timeline. I love timelines, but I love them for that reason. Because you read, oh, it's about 4 years. And I'm reading that, and I'm like, no, that can't be 4 years. Because it doesn't work out based on verse 12. So that's what's fun. I enjoy doing that, if you haven't noticed. So anyway, keep reading with me, will you? After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated. Well, don't you think it's about time? His anger had abated, and we're talking 2.5, 3 years. He should have gotten over it by now, but remember, we looked at the verse last week that said pretty much that he was totally consumed with this, and that was all he could think about. So his anger had abated. And it says, he remembered Vashti. Now, I love to look at words and see what these words really, really mean. We're going to do a lot of that tonight. And we're going to be toggling back and forth between the ESV and the KJV. And I thought it was funny this morning, Pastor Gene did that very same thing, didn't he? Because he was talking about the ESV and how, I don't even remember what he was saying, but then he said, well, it's this way in the KJV. And I thought, yeah. I find that too. I toggle back and forth, and sometimes I don't agree completely with how the ESV puts stuff. And tonight I'll explain why. But anyway, so he says he remembered her. Remembered here means to recall or actually to mention. Now, sorry, I had a frog who came to Bible study. Recalling is what we'd probably think, oh, he's sitting there, he's all defeated and everything, and then now he's thinking about Vashti. But I love the fact that verb can also be mentioned, because when he starts mentioning her, and there's these 7 guys that are probably still his advisors, right? And her name starts coming up. Do you really think that if there was some way to maybe pass another law, that you can't undo the law of the Medes and Persians, but they find ways to... Because that's what happens later in the book of Esther. They had a law of the Medes and Persians to kill the Jews. But the Jews didn't all get killed because there was another law that was passed. And we'll talk about that when the time comes. So he probably could have done something tricky. So these 7 guys probably don't want that to happen. Why? Whose idea was it to start out with? Their idea. So if somehow or another Vashti could come back to the throne, who do you think she might not be too terribly happy with? Right? Also, one thing I didn't tell you, we really sympathize with Vashti, right? It was not fair at all what happened to her. And we were feeling really bad for her by the end of the time last time, right? However, according to history, Vashti was not a very nice person. She was known for being a very harsh individual. And so chances are, she would not have taken too kindly to those 7 guys and what they suggested be done to her. And if you think long term, had she stayed in her position and this would have happened regarding the Jews and wanting to annihilate the Jews, she probably would have not had a problem with that at all. So what a way for God to get her out of the way and put a sympathizer in there, right? But anyway, so... he is starting to mention Vashti, and I find this very interesting. He remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Now, if you slow down and you read that, okay, what did he remember? Did he just remember Vashti? No, we're told a little bit more. But we're actually told two things. What does he remember? What she did and what was decreed against her. You know what that tells me? Man might be coming around to his senses a little bit and actually sees that there were really two sides to that whole thing. He remembers her and what she did, but he also remembers then what was done to her. That sounds a little bit more caring and a little bit more logical at this point, because we found last week he wasn't too terribly logical. Remember that whole thing with reaction and responding, and how the reaction was an illogical thing, and you end up with illogical decisions? So anyway, I thought, well, now he sees that there are two sides. So we have, in verse 2, then the king's young men, same 7 probably that we talked about last week, who attended him said, all right, they come up with another idea. These guys are just full of ideas, right? Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the capital, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. All right, let's stop there. Now, these 7 guys who came up with this idea, I read something really interesting in that if Ahasuerus had his moment where he was like, oh, I wish I'd never listened to these guys. I wish Vashti was still my queen. Well, if he had that moment, I'm just speculating. That probably was thrown out the back door because somewhere along in his travels to conquer Greece, I read that there was an eclipse that happened. And his advisors, probably some of these 7 guys or all of them, because remember they were astrologers, they said it's a bad omen. You don't go do anything during eclipse. You don't go and try to, attack or whatever. And he did and suffered this huge defeat. And I don't know which battle that was, and I don't know if it was the one that took out a lot of his men or took out a lot of his ships. But anyway, they claimed that he lost because he did this during the eclipse and he should have listened to them. Okay, so now he's back. He's defeated. He lost. And he didn't listen to these guys. So now, who do you think he's going to listen to? I didn't listen to him for that. I lost. So they have my ear. So they come up with this plan. And one thing we've got to remember, and I told you this before. Oops, there's a reaction thing. This is not our Cinderella story. Catherine saw my slide today. She goes, you're going to show a Cinderella slide? I sure am. This is not what we have imagined perhaps through the years. And as we look at how these girls were taken and what was done to them, I think you'll find that Disney's not going to make a movie about this. All right? Especially for little children. But let's look at verse 3. More of the plan. Let the king appoint officers in all of the provinces of his kingdom. How many?
127.
Thank you very much. 127 provinces. To gather all of the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa and under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given to them, and let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Some verbs here. When you look at verbs like sought out or gathered together, and if we look in verse 8, when Esther is actually taken, look at verse 8 with me. So the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai. Esther also was taken into the king's palace, and technically there's a was there too, was put in the custody of Haggai. Does any of that sound voluntary? There we go, to you? No, and when you look at these verbs and what in their original, what the original words were, you get things like to lay hold of, to seize, to take away, to snatch, to assemble, to collect. None of that sounds to me like this was a voluntary thing. Josephus, the Jewish historian from years and years and years and years ago, said that there were as many as 400 young women taken to the palace. And if you read, that's not news to you because I think that was in your book. Now, the girls being around the age of 12 to 15, like we've discussed before, according to Persian customs. So these would have been young 12 to 15-year-old girls, unmarried. And I read something really interesting I want to read to you guys from Warren Wiersbe. It says, knowing the king's strong sensual appetite, the counselors suggested that he assemble a new harem composed of the most beautiful young virgins in the empire. This was not a beauty contest where the winners were rewarded by having a chance for the throne. These young women were conscripted against their will and made a part of the royal harem. Every night the king had a new partner, and in the new morning she joined the rest of the concubines. The one that pleased the king the most would become his new queen. I wonder how many beautiful girls hid when the king's officers showed up to abduct them. Heartbroken mothers and fathers no doubt lied to the officers and denied that they had any virgin daughters. Perhaps some of the girls married any available man rather than spend a hopeless life shut up in the king's harem. Once they had been with the king, they belonged to him and could not marry. If the king ignored them, they were destined for a life of loneliness, shut up in a royal harem. Now, you think Disney's going to make a movie about that? Such a sad thing. And that's why, I like to read stories, but I also like to look beyond the story and think there is more to the story than what we are actually told. And we know the Esther part and we know the Mordecai part, but what about 399 other girls and 399 or so, because some may have come from the same family, who knows? But what about all those families who lost their daughters, who somebody came and knocked on the door and said, oh, she's pretty, she's going. And it was decided by that officer in that province that he was going to take this girl and cart her back to Shushan, however far that might have been from where they were, and that girl was gone forever. That family would never, ever see her again, unless, perchance, she were to become the queen, and then whenever the queen was able to come out for an event, maybe they could have gone and seen their daughter. That would have been their only hope. Now, there actually have been some kings through history that would send a woman back to the harem and have her killed so that no one else ever had a chance of having her, or she never had a chance to be unfaithful to him. So see, you were property to do with whatever the king wanted to do with you, and even have you killed if he was afraid that you were going to try to escape the harem or whatever. Not a Cinderella life. So, as I read this and put my notes together and all, I thought, this is quite a frustrating chapter. We start out with a frustrated king, and then you've got Esther, who probably was frustrated. You got Mordecai, who was frustrated because here he had taken her as his own daughter and reared her and lost her, which could very possibly have been his own family member. We're not really told that he had anybody else, but we just may not have been told. You have Vashti, who I'm sure was frustrated. You have the 399 roughly other families who were frustrated, and 399 victims of kidnapping who were taken to the harem. Such a chapter of frustration. And kind of interesting that a chapter of frustration would come after a chapter on reactions. It's like, okay, are you going to react or are you going to respond? Well, then let's just talk about frustrations. And then, in keeping with the way God always does, whenever I have to teach a lesson, he always makes sure that I have ample opportunity to practice this long before I ever get up here. Pastor Jean probably finds the very same thing. And so, I've had quite a bit of frustration. And yesterday I spent an entire afternoon working on a toilet. When I really wanted to be working on this, I was even making slides for this afternoon. And I was working on a toilet, and it is still not fixed. But I will win. I will win. But anyway, and then I get here, and slides aren't working right. Katie and Janet saved the day. Yay. But anyway, it's all up and running. But it's all, I got in the back of my head. Respond. Don't react. Respond. Don't react. I'm like, Lord, I don't really want to teach these lessons because I just want to react and be fine. It's easier. Yeah. But he gives me ample opportunity to practice what I teach, But anyway, I got to pondering this, and then I thought it was so neat that this morning in church, Pastor Jean brought up the same thing. When he was speaking this morning and talking about Jacob and Esau, and how Jacob got the blessing that Esau was supposed to have. Oh, that's not supposed to happen. The firstborn is supposed to get this. And Rebecca had this sneaky plan, right? She made a choice to sneak Jacob in there and get him Esau's blessing. And then, remember Pastor Jean had us flip back a couple of pages, and then there was the story of when they were born and the prophecy at their birth that the younger would rule over the older. That was God's plan all along, right? And whether Rebecca remembered that moment or not, because after all, she had just had twins, we'll forgive her if she didn't remember the moment, right? But even if she didn't remember the moment, she had a plan. She made a choice. She was going to put this into play, but God's plan still prevailed, right? It didn't matter. She made, and so as I thought about that and how people make choices, and how does God, with our sinful, awful choices, still work His will? And if you have a really good answer for that, please let me know. Because that is just something I can never get my hands completely around, is the sovereignty of God and the free will of man, and how that all works together to work the God's plan. So I found this, and I thought it was neat, and I wanted to share it with you. So wise and powerful is our God that He can permit men and women to make personal choices and still accomplish His purposes in the world. When He isn't permitted to rule, He will overrule, but His will shall ultimately be done and His name glorified. We worship and serve a sovereign God who is never caught by surprise. No matter what our circumstances may be, we can always say with confidence, Hallelujah, the Lord God omnipotent reigns, as Revelation says. And you look here, no plan can thwart God's plan. And that's why, as we make our plans, how important is it for us to really pray earnestly over those to make sure that they align with God's plan? Because if they don't, and we go about our own way, God's plan is going to be worked out, but we sometimes can make an awful mess for us at the moment, right? And so many stories through Scripture with that, and people doing their own thing, but God's plan still overruling. But like I said, I don't know that that's ever anything any of us will be able to get our hands around, but we see that through here. God's plan will be kept regardless of the schemes of man that are dreamed up all through here. But let's keep going. In verse 3, we are introduced to a new character. I love characters and learning about these characters. His name is Haggai. He's a eunuch, and it says he is in charge of the women. And he comes back up a little bit later. So he's the one who runs the home, and the king had homes. I mean, because if you thought 400 girls just got scarfed up and brought to Shushan, there's going to have to be some pretty large facilities to house all those girls, right? So Haggai, I don't know if he was like the chief that was over them all, or if he was just of a particular house, and that was the house that Esther got put into. I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. But it says that they are to be given, and this is where people go, oh, it's got to be a beauty contest, because look here, they're going to, in verse, 3, let their cosmetics be given to them. So, hey, you get this little girl from some province way out there, and she gets brought in, and she gets a spa day at the king's palace. And this is what we're going to look at next week. We're going to look at the process that they went through for those 12 months. It was so neat to look at that a little bit in detail and see what the customs of the day were. So you want to come next week, make sure you do. But anyway, the word cosmetic here I found interesting because it doesn't mean like Mary Kay or Maybelline, and it's not translated CoverGirl. It is actually means things for purification, or a body scraping or scouring. It doesn't sound like a nice exfoliation kind of thing that maybe you would have with a mud bath or something. And I'm thinking, okay, body scraping and scouring and rubbing. It doesn't sound very pleasant, but that's what that word literally means. But you'll understand that a little bit more next week. and let their cosmetics be given to them. Makes it sound like each one was greeted at the door with a nice little basket. Here's your robe, here's your slippers, here's your basket, hot tubs down the hall to the left. Right? Yeah. No, actually, be given literally means to be inflicted upon. Now, does that sound pleasant? Not at all. It doesn't sound like the spa, robe, slippers kind of thing. So something was going to be given to them and something was going to be inflicted upon them. That's what we'll talk about next week. But just to whet your interest a little bit. But if you notice the end of verse 4, it says, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this pleased the king, and he did so. The ultimate motive behind all of this was just for the king's pleasure. And he's listening to these guys come up with this plan. It says, it pleased the king, so he did it. And just like that, 400 girls' lives were changed. No idea how many people's lives were changed because every one of them had families. Just because of one choice. One person's choice affected all of that. And why was he making this choice? Why was he in this position? Because of a reaction that he made the chapter before. Right? So your reaction has a ripple effect. And now we're talking even 2 and 3 years down the line. That rage that he had from chapter 1 is still having a rippling effect. Hundreds of people. It's frightful, isn't it? Might want to think before we react next time, right? That might come back to haunt us 3 years later and hundreds of people later. You never know.
His reaction then is the exact same wording. This advice pleased the king.
Mm-hmm.
It's all
about what makes me happy.
Whatever thing. That thing was because it pleased him. This thing was because it pleased him.
And you remember I kind of described him, read a little paragraph that described that king and how he was emotionally driven, hot-headed, and we're seeing that, aren't we? Doesn't seem to be the most logical, intellectual, kind ruler that we would have in our Cinderella story. But let's keep going. In verse 5, there was a Jew in Susa the citadel whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. Whew, that is one really long sentence. But you know what I love about that? There was a guy named Mordecai. He could have left it at that, right? Whoever wrote Esther could have left it at that. So for some reason, whoever wrote the book of Esther didn't leave it at that and gave us information. So when we're given this extra information, it's for a reason. Because there's only so much, acreage in the Bible. So I think God probably would have wanted to use that very, very carefully. So if it is there for a reason. So we've got information. But let's look at Mordecai, and we'll figure out why we've got all this information. His name means little man. I love that because of where he ends up. Because, do you remember last week, we're talking about these 7 guys that are the king's advisors? And I told you what their names meant, right? It was like lofty and worthy, and Memucan, the one that came up with the whole idea, his name meant dignified, I think, right? We had somebody by the name of Yellow Jasper. I still hadn't figured that one out. Remember that? Okay. So we have worthy and lofty and dignified, and then we have a little man. I love it, like I said, just because of where he ends up. Now we're told who his father is, and who his grandfather is, and then who his great-grandfather is. Now this is where the ESV does a really good job, because if you were to read the KJV, it is very confusing as to who was carried away in the captivity. So, people argued over that. Well, it was the father that was carried away. No, it was the grandfather that was carried away. But no, really, it was the great-grandfather. who was carried away from Jerusalem. And then you see he was carried away when Jeconiah, we also know him as Jehoiakim, who was the son of Jehoiakim. Remember that those names might ring a bell a little bit more than Jeconiah. It's the same guy. And he was the king of Judah when Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, carried him away. And we know that happened in 597. That was the second siege of Jerusalem. So when Jehoiakim was the king and Nebuchadnezzar came in and took a bunch of captives back, Kish was one of the ones taken away. Now I want to show you something. We don't have time. Well, I won't show you. But look at the bottom. You see 2 Chronicles 36 and 2 Kings 24. Pay attention to those because sometimes just go back. If we had time, I would go there. I don't. But if you go there and you look, with having had study and having these historical events kind of right fresh in your mind, those chapters will probably make a little bit more sense than if you had read them a couple months ago and things were a little bit dusty. I know they did for me. But I think it's absolutely awesome when you look at this timeline and you see that Mordecai's great-grandfather back in 597 was carted away to Babylon 117 years before Mordecai needed to be there. Pretty cool, huh? God doesn't just all of a sudden wake up and and concocts a plan for right then. God's plan has already been concocted from way before. Okay? And here we have him setting Mordecai's family in Babylon 117 years before Mordecai actually had to be there. Now, what's this 58-year thing? This is another weird Chris timeline thing. Because I like to find out where in Scripture and other places is this same person mentioned. So when I'm looking up somebody, I kind of look to see where he's found in other places. Well, Mordecai is actually mentioned in Ezra, the beginning of the book of Ezra. I'm not exactly sure which chapter. And Nehemiah is mentioned in that list too, because Ezra was a record keeper. And so he had a list of all these people, not all, well maybe, I don't know, if he listed them all. I haven't looked at it in a while. But this list has names of people who went in this first wave back from Babylon to go back to Jerusalem to build the temple. And in that list, there's a guy named Mordecai. And then there's a guy named Nehemiah. And people are like, oh, well, he must have gone over there. But he's in Babylon now. So maybe he went over there and then he came back. And then if you look in Nehemiah, there's a list in Nehemiah. And I think he might appear in that list too. I should have looked it up. But here's the deal. Mordecai was a common Jewish man's name. So was Nehemiah. Chances are it's probably some other Mordecai and some other Nehemiah. Because if you look, when they went back to build that first wave, that was 58 years before where we are right now in the palace. Now that's 58 years plus whatever age Mordecai would have been when he went back, if that indeed were him. So if he was a 20-year-old guy, he would have been 78 years old at this time in the palace when we're talking about Esther. It could work. I don't know, but chances are it's probably a different Mordecai. I just wanted to tell you that. So if you start reading Ezra and you see him there and trying to figure out how that all works out, that's the thought on that. Now let's look at verse 7. We meet Esther. Finally, you'd think after so many weeks we'd gotten there by now. So we have, he was bringing up Hadassah. That is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. All right, what's that make Esther? His cousin. I don't know how many things you can read. It's like, oh, he raised his niece. Drives me crazy. Like, no, it's the daughter of his uncle. That's his cousin. And we're even later given her father's name, so we could do a little family tree if we wanted to. Don't put it past me. I might do that, you know. If it's a bad timeline week, I might do a family tree week. You never know. Okay, so anyway, he's bringing up, that word there, bringing up, means to care for. Where was that? Support, nourish, and you know what? it actually has a nuance to that word that actually means to foster. Like he was her foster father. Isn't that neat? I love the word choice there. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So look here, let's see. What did we find out from Esther in just that little bit? Well, it didn't give us the dates, but there's your dates again. Her Jewish name was Hadassah, which means myrtle, and her Persian name means star. We're told she has a beautiful figure and lovely to look at. You find that interesting? That is foreshadowing, yeah. But it's also very descriptive. And it is quite a compliment. And, you know, the Bible's really not given to much exaggeration. What the Bible says, right? So if we read that she has this incredible figure and she's just very lovely to look at, do you remember what Vashti's name meant? Beautiful. Exactly. And so that is the goal, right? Is to find the most beautiful person in the kingdom and bring her in. But you know, we're really not, this part of her, the beautiful figure and lovely to look at, is not really emphasized much after this, which is kind of interesting because then we find out it was far more than her physical beauty that is what Esther was all about, right? We know that she was an orphan. We also know that she was a minority and probably of a very low social class there because she was a minority in a Persian society. Even though Mordecai's family had been there for 117 years, and were still Jews living in a foreign land, right? So she was a minority and she was poor. Great lesson here on circumstances, but we're going to get to that in just a minute. You know what I find out too, or find interesting too, is the fact that she has two names in Scripture. She has her Jewish name and her Persian name. Mordecai doesn't. He only has a Jewish name. So that begs the question of, did he call her Esther? Did he call her Hadassah? What did Mordecai call her? And when did she become Esther? Was she not Esther until she got taken into the palace? Which is highly likely because you remember, if you read the book of Daniel, we have some people by different names that were brought over. You know, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego had their names changed once they went to Babylon. So is that what happened to Esther? I don't know. That's all just my imagination going wild. But we do know that her name was Esther, or changed to Esther at some point in time. Some speculate that perhaps she didn't look really Jewish. That's how people didn't know when they took her to the palace that she was Jewish. So maybe he gave her a Persian name to kind of make life easier for her. And that might have been a bad move on Mordecai's part because then they thought she was Persian and took her. So if indeed he did that, that's the hand of God, right? See? So I don't know. There's all kinds of speculation out there we can spend a lot of time on. But kind of makes you wonder too, who do you think discovered her? You know, kind of like, oh, I got discovered. I'm going to be America's Next Top Model. Yeah. Who actually discovered her? Was she around the city enough that she had this reputation as that beautiful girl walking down the sidewalk? That's, you know, she lives with that guy Mordecai. So when the edict went out that people in every province, including Susa apparently, right, had to bring in, or these officials had to bring in these pretty girls, somebody targeted her. Oh, I've seen her at the market. I'm going to go get her for the king and win the Official of the Year award because I brought the next queen to the king. Somebody had to discover her, and somebody took her to the house in verse 8. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many of the young women were gathered, we don't have any idea how long that took. But it had to go out to 127 provinces. Esther was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. But verse 9, I love verse 9. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Look at this with me. And this is where I have my ESV KJV thing, okay? ESV tells us, and the young woman, being Esther, pleased Haggai and won his favor. But if you read in the KJV, and the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, you're like, well, that doesn't really look, I guess, that much different. But when you start looking at the words individually and seeing what they mean, what this sounds like when we read it is, oh, he just really liked her, and he picked a favorite. Is that what you think? But look at the KJV. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness. If you look up the word obtained, it means to bear or to carry or to lift up. Now, when I didn't read that to you, and you're looking at that, you're thinking obtain means she got, right? But the verb there actually is this person doing something, lifting up or carrying. Now, I'm not saying that couldn't be understood to be the way that they translated it. There we go. But I'm saying don't stop there, because if you dig a little bit deeper, you see that there's actually another way to look at this, and it's really, really cool. Look at verse 15, because we're going to see it again. Is it verse 15? Let's see. And when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abiel, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked, wait, that's not the right verse. Where do we want to go? Yeah, it was verse 15. Yeah, it's the end of it, sorry. Start with now. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Let me show you this. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her, as the ESV. KJV says, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Now that almost looks like the same as the verse before, right? So obtain there means she carried or she lifted up or she bore up something. And then we have two different words. We have kindness, which is kindness or goodness. And when we have in verse 15, we have favor, which is grace or charm. Wow. When you take a step back and you look at it and go, okay, we know that her beauty is what got her in there in the first place, right? But once she got into the house, everybody was pretty, right? You had to be pretty to be chosen to get put in there. So something other than how she looked is what set her apart from everybody else. Would you agree? And that is what these verses are trying to tell us if you dig a little bit deeper. It says with verse, let me see if I can go back. Verse 9, she lifted up kindness of him, means in his presence, to his face. All right? You go back to verse 15, she lifted up grace in the sight. Sight there is a literal eyeball, seeing somebody, of all of them that looked on her. Look doesn't mean they just saw her. Look there means they discerned her. Now, you go, where are you going with all of this? I'm going to put it all together for you right now, hopefully in a decent way. Esther, though pretty, in a house now full of pretty people, lifted up grace before these people, before Haggai. And I'm looking at verse 9 thinking, okay, was she just kissing up to him? You know, because I'm in here, I'm here against my will, so you may as well make the best of it. Kiss up to the person that has all the stuff that you need, and maybe I'll get out of here faster. So it's easy to think maybe she was doing that. But for verse 15 negates that idea for us, because we find out not only did she do it toward Haggai, she did it toward all these other women who had nothing to give her. She had nothing to gain from being nice to Jane over here, because Jane was scarfed up and brought in just like she was, right? I guess Jane's a good Persian name, I don't know. You see what I'm saying? And so given her situation that she was in, she lifted up grace before these people. Now, with these women, it says in front of them, in their sight, and they were able to discern, looked upon her, they discerned that she was the real deal. You see? I love that word looked, because it's to inspect, to perceive, to observe, or to discern. They saw that she was the real deal doing this. Esther completely set herself apart by lifting up grace in a terrible situation that she found herself in. Isn't that cool? And when you look at it that way, it's like, okay, when you just read the cursory, now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. She was Miss Popularity. You know, not only we have a beauty contest, we have a popularity contest now in the harem. See, and we trivialize it down to those commonality things. And if we take the time and pick it apart, we see it's a whole lot deeper. Now we're finding out who Esther is and who the real Esther is. And look at this. I love this. So let's look at her circumstances. She was young, a minority, an orphan, and poor. She was kidnapped from her family forever. She was now the property of a very powerful, egomaniacal, pleasure-seeking king. And she was surrounded by beautiful, self-centered women who were in hot competition for the highest prize. Yeah. And now we see how she acts. She lifted up grace before them. Wow. Look at this. She didn't let the place change her, and she didn't let the people change her. What are the two things, a lot of times, that we have problems with? We have a problem with where we are, or a problem with who we're with, or both. Right? And Esther had that times 399, right? She didn't allow herself to become a victim of her circumstances, and she didn't use her circumstances as an excuse to sin. Wow. Chew on that one. You can't always change your circumstances, but you can change the way you view your circumstances. I've said this a lot through the years to my own children, haven't I? Yeah. Some's not going your way. You don't like the situation that you were in. Sometimes if you take a step back and realize there's nothing I can do about that, but let's take a different approach in the perspective of how we're going to go about this, right? I think that could fall under perhaps the category of responding and not reacting to, right? Okay, we're almost done because I don't know if you're as hot as I am, but I am hot. It wasn't her physical, or it was not, let's see, I got to back up. It was not her physical beauty that won her favor in the king's house. God used that to get her there, but her inner beauty and grace was now getting noticed above all of the beauty in the kingdom. And then one last thing. We already read it, but we have Haggai. His response to her, and look at what happens. He quickly gave her the things for the purification process and her food. Now, mind you, we've got a little orphan, minority, poor girl that is now in the king's house. And he had nice stuff. And remember how chapter 1 reiterated to us what all he had. That's why he had those feasts, to show everybody what he had. That's why he said the wine just went in abundance, because it could, because he had so much. So she got everything that she needed for the processes in which they had to go through quickly, almost like he moved her to the head of the line. Look at this. The poor, little, minority, orphan girl now gets 7 maidens to help her. Wow. I could go for 1. But she got 7. And then he advanced or preferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. She's still being held hostage. She can't get out. But within the confines of that harem prison, so to speak, she got the best place. She got 7 maidens, and she got the stuff that she needed. So when we were talking that timeline, how long was Esther there? In a way, it kind of makes you think Esther may have been one of the very first ones to be done with the process. You know, what happened to all the other ones? I don't know. We'll talk about that when we get there. We might not have anything to talk about when we get there, but it makes us think that maybe she got up to the front of the line. And you know, I'm going to stop there for tonight, because I know we were supposed to go down to verse 11, but starting with chapter 10 next week really will be a good launch into what the rest of the lesson for next week is. And plus we can also open the door and not be so hot. But anyway, so let's go ahead and pray, and we'll be done.